Well, welcome to this webinar titled Understanding SharePoint Search. If you're here, then hopefully you're here to understand how this search functionality, of course, can help you specifically within SharePoint. Now, of course, search in general, we're all aware that we use that far more often than any navigation systems these days. With Bing and Google and everything else out there, of course, search has definitely spoiled us for more than a decade now. So now we're going to talk about how it can help you specifically within SharePoint. Now, some of you, I'm sure, already have some good experience working with search, or at least performing searches, and hopefully you're able to get good results, or maybe you were disappointed. So it is definitely for you, for the power users, for the IT administrators, for folks who are in charge of SharePoint, and everybody else who really want to understand how it works. So we have a couple of presenters with us. By the way, my name, first of all, is Asif Rahmani. I am the host today. But the main presenters we have are Robert Pidoki and Joshua Noble. Those guys are experts in SharePoint Search for many years, helping all sorts of clients, small organizations to medium and large organizations, and guiding them, advising them, helping them understand how they can get the most out of their SharePoint investment. Because, of course, information is what it's all about, and you want information to be readily available and findable. Here are the couple of books that you'll also see that they have written. And also, Robert and Joshua have authored a SharePoint 2010 Search DVD, which is actually now available on our site on SharePointVideos.com. So you can go ahead and check it out right away. And I'll give you more information about the Search DVD pretty soon as well. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. There's one quick slide that I have to introduce you a little bit more about SharePoint Videos. And if you're new to it, the two main pillars, the two main cornerstones of our, what we offer the community, what we offer to the public, are Visual SP and the multi-user access to SharePoint Videos. The first one, Visual SP, is basically the in-context, on-demand help system for SharePoint users, SharePoint end users specifically. So there's a help tab that comes up directly on in SharePoint, and they can get exposed to specific information that you want them to see in terms of documents, videos, images, etc. And recently we won a Bronze Award from Windows IT Pro on that as well. And of course, multi-user access to SharePointVideos.com, the second main pillar, the second main product that we have. That basically is to help the power users, IT professionals, developers, no-code developers, everybody understand all different functionality within SharePoint, right? So things like branding, how do I brand, reporting services, how do I build solutions with reporting services, workflows, SharePoint Designer, systems, InfoPath, site administrators, site collection administrators, what are the different options that they have to configure, set up the system properly, etc. All that stuff is available on our site, 430 plus videos, fully narrated by SharePoint experts. No code solutions, all of them. Okay, so that's all I have over here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over first to Robert. Robert, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and pass the control to you, and then you can get started. So here we go.
Great. I will just share my server because I'm going to show you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. So what I'm going to show you is some hands-on stuff with SharePoint Search. Just a little bit of background about SharePoint Search. As Asif said, search is ubiquitous now. People are using search everywhere to find things, and people really rely on search. And of course, that's why everyone is here to see this. So that's great. We all understand that. What maybe we don't understand as well is how search is structured and the core components of how we can make search work better. And every search engine has basically two sides to it, two components. The back-end side, and that's the side that does the crawling, builds the index, and makes the search engine capable of finding everything. Then there is the other side, which is the front end. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to show you some of the back-end stuff. how we can manipulate the index a little bit to get SharePoint Search to work a little bit better for us. And Josh will show you a little bit on the front side how to display some extra information and show things a little bit better way. So I'll jump right into it because I know we are limited in time today and there's lots of things to cover. First of all, in SharePoint, the search engine is controlled by something called the Search Service Application. And in order to get there, we need to go to Manage Service Applications in our Central Administration module in SharePoint. So I'll just go there. Hope my server will be speedy enough for us today. You can see we have a Search Service Application here. Usually by default it's installed. If it's not, you can create a new one. I'll dig into the Search Service Application. If you're using something like FAST, then you'll have a FAST query component and a FAST content component, but I won't get into that today. And then you can see a lot of information here about the Search Service Application and the things that it does, how many items are in the index, which user we've told the search engine to use in order to go and get all the content, as well as if the other components or the components of the Search Service Application are functioning properly. I'm sorry, my screen on the server is a little bit funky, but I'll just show you here. So there are several different components to the Search Service Application: an admin component, a crawler component that goes out and does the crawling, some databases which are held in SQL, and our index, which is held on the file structure. I won't go into that too much, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the biggest issues that I see and hear about when I'm dealing with people who have search problems. Number one is indexing different kinds of file content. And probably the biggest one that you may have seen is that out of the box, SharePoint 2010 doesn't index PDF files. It also doesn't index JPEG files out of the box. So if you're looking for images, you won't get those out of the box. And the place to add these is here in this File Types section under Crawling. In order to add a new file type, you just need to click New File Type, enter the extension of the file type. So in the case of PDF, we'll hit PDF. In the case of JPEG, we'll hit enter JPEG and hit OK. I've already got them mapped, so I won't do it. But it will add that new file type. And if it has an image available for that, it will associate that image already. Now, something to say about the PDF file type is that it's not enough just to have the file type added. If you have just the file type added, the SharePoint crawler will go out and it will start to pick up items that are suffixed PDF. And it will grab the file type or the file name of that document and any associated properties that you have in SharePoint and match them together and put them in the index. What you will not be able to do with just that is search for items that are inside the PDF. In order to do that, you need to install the Adobe iFilter or another, maybe Foxit or something, iFilter, which is actually a component that helps SharePoint open the document, grab the text out of the document, and store it in its index. So first thing to do is add the file type. Then you can go and add that iFilter. There are lots of blog posts out there, so I won't go into detail about how to do that right here because it's kind of time restricted, but it's not that difficult to do. You just need to install the component and then add a registry key, restart the search service. So with the JPEGs, there's really nothing to get there unless you want to get the metadata from a JPEG, and then of course you need an iFilter as well, which, as I said, is the component that will crack open the document and take any kind of text or properties out of it.
Robert, good question here. The PDF iFilter is installed by default in SharePoint 2013, correct?
That's correct. Actually, what Microsoft has done is they have built their own document parser in SharePoint 2013. And it handles both Office documents and PDF documents. So it's a different technology than iFilter technology. iFilter technology is, in IT terms, a little bit old now. And it is a component that's open. You can build your own iFilters even if you wanted to. And third-party companies like Foxit clearly do. But what it will do is it'll crack open the document and then it'll stream the text out of the document and then allow the crawler to pick that up. The new component in 2013 is completely closed, and it only works on Office and PDF, but it works very quickly. Like there's a huge performance increase. I've seen the numbers, but I can't remember exactly what they are. There's a very big increase in performance for those. If you have a document type that is not Office or PDF, so for example, a CAD type document, you still need to get another iFilter. And the iFilter platform is still supported for other document types, and third-party vendors can continue to support documents. But for PDF and Word, it's out of the box in 2013 with a different kind of mechanism. Good question.
Another question on iFilters is there a TIFF iFilter available? I know I use the AutoCAD one from iFilter Shop all the time, but I don't know if I've noticed if there's a TIFF one.
That's another good question, because when it comes to TIFF, there's some question. What is part of a TIFF? You know, TIFF is just a container. So there's a couple of things you can get out of a TIFF. One is the metadata that's associated with the TIFF, and there's definitely an iFilter that allows you to pull out, I think it's XMP metadata out of the TIFF, or you know oh no, it has a different name, but you know the metadata that's associated with the image, and you can get an iFilter that will do that, and perhaps that's something that's available for free. There is also the option, and this is probably what people are more interested in, because what we'll have is we'll have a TIFF that is a scan from a photocopier. And because what we'll often get is if we'll go to the photocopier and we'll put our document on there and we'll say, okay, send that to my whatever, make a copy of this and scan it. But then the photocopier will actually scan the TIFF and just embed that in a PDF file or something like that. And that's a bigger issue because you actually don't have any text. Some of the newer photocopiers will actually do optical character recognition on the document and then store the text from that document in a layer in the PDF, which is really cool. But still a lot of people are left with old TIFFs that have these. So what you need is really an OCR system to go through and open that and text it. I'm not exactly sure what the state of the market is for that right now, so I do recommend you do a Google search for TIFF OCR and iFilter, something like that, and see what is available out there. But generally, iFilters themselves don't have that kind of mechanism.
Ontolica Preview would also let you search within that document, doing the image recognition as well, so you're not actually reading the document. It would do an image recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, this is sort of the one main thing that I get a question from, that people are coming back, why can't I see my PDF files in SharePoint? And this is why, because we haven't got them crawled by default. Sometimes they won't crawl properly. Sometimes you have to do some tricks in order to get the PDFs crawled by using crawl rules. But basically, PDFs, JPEGs, they're not out of the box crawled. Add them as file types and add the iFilter if you can. The other thing that I want to show, which is very useful, is mapping metadata properties. By this time, we're all using custom columns in SharePoint, and we're associating a lot of rich metadata, custom properties, with our documents. And that's super important too, because those properties tell us more about the document than even some of the content in the document, and are maybe more applicable to what our organization or the content management that we're doing in SharePoint. The issue is that those custom properties that or those custom columns that we're storing the properties in SharePoint are not indexed by default. They're crawled by default, but they're not placed into the index, and so they're not really usable. So if you're building a lot of data and you're putting things in custom properties, and then you're wondering, well, why can't I've tagged this particular document, why can't I find it based on my tag? And that's because we haven't told the search index that property should be in there and it should be searchable. So that's where we come to this metadata properties field here under queries and results, because this is where we tell the search engine, take this crawl property and make it into something that's searchable. So we can see here there's a list of managed properties that are here, and there's a list of crawled properties, so we can see all the things that SharePoint has picked up. And if we have custom columns, we can map our own custom value, our own custom property, to a crawled property. One of the issues that SharePoint has is that everyone likes to use the content type property. But one of the issues that SharePoint has is that some of these are locked by default. And they're also mapped to properties like, for example, Basic 5. Basic 5 is a physical property, I believe, that comes, I'm not exactly sure how the mechanism works, but that comes from IAS, probably a header or something like that came back physical property. And it's not a SharePoint property, really. SharePoint properties we can see because they're usually prefixed by OWS. So we know this is a column property of the content type. And by default, these two are mapped to the content type property. And a lot of people tell me, I would like to see the content type in my results list. But when I put this content type out there, I don't get anything. And the reason for that is because this Basic 5 property is polluting the values that are in the index. And what we basically want to do is we want to get rid of it. But we can't, because this one, as we can see, is locked. And that's because SharePoint is using it itself by default. So we can't really do anything with this. The solution to that is, of course, to make our own property. So I'll just show you how to do that. I've done this a lot of times because people always want to use that content type property in their search. You can see there's one here called cont type that I've already made, but I'll just make a new one to show you. So I'm going to call this one C type, which is basically my version of the content type. I want the same content type values to be in it, so I can use the content types out in the search result list. Keep it as text, and then I'll add a mapping. And I'll just search for content here. You can also find the SharePoint content property here. And I'll find the content type value that I want. In this case, I'm going to use the OWS content type because I know this is the SharePoint list content type. So I'll just add that, or the content type that comes from SharePoint and not something else. And you can see there are lots of values there that SharePoint crawler had picked up and just stored in the property database. This is something I found. You can also decide whether you want to use in scopes. I don't want to use it in scopes. And you can make it use less storage, or you can allow it to be retrieved in the query, which I'm going to say yes to.
Robert, question here. Is there a benefit for not checking to use it in scopes? I mean, do you decrease the size of the database or improve crawl times or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are not default checked because everything takes time and space and resources. So adding it as a scope is going to add extra storage requirements and size to the index. I'm not exactly sure how much that is. I've never seen any kind of performance degradation because you've used it in scopes, but that's the reason. So I always err on the side of caution, and I don't add it if I don't absolutely need it in a scope. So here you can see I've got it mapped here. My new C type goes to the OWS content type. I can click on this one, or I can go to the crawl properties list and look at it, because one thing that I want to make sure when I'm doing this is that these values are actually searchable. So if they're not searchable, it doesn't mean you still can't query them or make them here. But if you want to have something returned in your search result set based on a property query, this one needs to be checked. If it's not checked, then you can still, like I said, return values for that, for say something like refiners, but you won't be able to actually get those things back by searching for that term. Of course, in content type, we probably don't want to search for content types and get results returned, so this is not necessary to be checked. But if you're not getting stuff back, that's the place to look for that. So now that I've got my content type new value listed here, I have to do a full crawl. And that's a very important thing because people will often add it and say, okay, now I want to use it. But any property mappings that you do or file type additions that you do require that you do a full crawl before they're available. And often, if you add a new custom property, you'll have to do two full crawls. One to go and pick up the new properties, and the second one to get that property in the index. So those are pretty much all the things that I want to show about the search service application today. Of course, you can see there's a lot of menu items. There's a lot of things to dig into here. And a lot of that stuff is covered in our DVD series. If you have any specific questions, we can address them now or later. Otherwise, I'll pass it off on to Josh.
One of the questions that Steve just passed across is why isn't the create date exposed or searchable by default? I can answer that. In the video series, we show a list of properties that are set up in SharePoint by default to not be searchable, or that you have to make duplicate properties for. And a lot of those are your default properties in SharePoint that every SharePoint environment is going to have. So they're a little bit restricted, more than likely just so there's less risk people can break SharePoint. But I do have a list of those properties that are available in the video series, so that way you can get around them. Another question, maybe for you, Robert. Can we define these search properties at the department site level, or does it need to be defined at the enterprise level?
Well, that's a good question and a little bit general question. All properties that need to be put in the index need to be defined at this level, at the central admin level, because they're done in the search service application. Of course, it's up to you to decide where you want to expose those properties and how you want to use them. So for example, if you want to build a separate search center that has a specific refiner in it, then you can do that at the site level and use that properties. But in order for those to be usable, it needs to be done at the farm level, at the highest level here in the search service application. You could have different search service applications for different search centers, so you could have different settings, but those still need to be here at this farm level.
Well, Robert, you want to pass over control
yes.
to me, and I'll present my screen.
Oh, you already are. Asif has done it for us. Thank you.
There we go. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Let me minimize.
Looks pretty good.
I won't monitor the chat, Robert. If you want to keep an eye on that. So what Robert showed already are some of the things that you would look at from the administrative perspective on the back end of SharePoint. What I want to take a look at is, once we've done some of these administrative things on the back end, how do we expose those to the users, and how do we really make use of this content in the search experience? Because just doing the back end doesn't really benefit anybody. Just doing the front end doesn't really benefit anybody. You kind of have to put them all together. So before I hop into the Search Center, let's look at kind of the core of the content that I would be searching on. This SharePointers Anonymous site is what we use throughout the video series to explain how to build out a lot of these search experiences. And we go into a lot of this stuff in a lot more detail. And when at the beginning of the video series, you'll notice this environment is flat, and we've built everything that you see here throughout the course of the video series. One of the things that you want to pay attention to is really what's serving the search experience. What we've done is we've created various different properties that users can tag. They can choose from drop-downs, checkboxes, pull content from the Manage Metadata service, and we show how to expose all those, including the ratings, throughout the series. So I don't want that's whole deep conversations all on its own. I just want to show what's coming back there. Now, when all these properties are created, these are set as what are called crawled properties. What Robert showed you how to do when he was speaking there is how to change these from crawled properties that are not necessarily exposed to the search index into mapped properties. And when you create that property mapping, you're now telling the search engine, okay, look at this property, consider this, and start being able to include that either as something you could display like a refiner, a field on the advanced search page, or just look at that property when you're running the search query each time and consider that for relevancy. So just adding the property here isn't necessarily going to add it to search. That's what you have to do Robert's part for. But all this stuff that we're looking at on this document library is what feeds into our Search Center. So I'll show you how to make kind of one of the more popular customizations to the Search Center. Here I have a standard entered SharePoint Search Center, and because we're on our SharePointers Anonymous site, we'll do a search here for disorders. Actually, let me change this around so I'm showing you something that doesn't have any sort of add-ons onto it. Give me just a second. Delete this custom web part. And so here, this is all a completely standard enterprise search center in SharePoint. Doesn't mean you have to have the enterprise level of SharePoint. Even the standard version of SharePoint comes with 2 search centers. One's a basic search center where you don't see things like these tabs up top, and then there's an enterprise search center where it allows you to build in those tabs. So looking at those different templates.
Just someone was asking about the preview icon. Josh, I just thought we should maybe clear that up.
Oh, that I took off of there. That's a third-party solution that Robert and I work for a company called Surfray, and we develop all sorts of different enhanced search experiences for SharePoint, different ways of manipulating the search experience. And that preview piece is a module that we offer called Ontoloca Search Preview. So we talk a little bit about third-party add-ons in the last video in the series, and not just what we do with Ontoloca, but various different things like Foxit's eye filters or concept searchings, concept classifiers. So there's details in there about different third-party add-ons, but that's not something you're able to do out of the box in SharePoint.
Okay.
So any other questions?
Not at the time.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to just manipulate here, and I think it brings us full circle on our story of how to build out a bit on the search experience, I want to add some customizations to the refinement panel. SharePoint by default is going to pull back some standard properties, and this is what you get with the refinement panel web part out of the box. This last one, this document type MMS property, is a custom property that I created. This is actually a managed metadata column. It's being fed from the term store. And in SharePoint's search refiners, you'll notice that anytime you make a managed metadata column that's coming from the term store, you're going to get that column coming back automatically in your search refinement panel. There are edits you can make where you can remove this so it no longer appears, but one of the common challenges I hear, you are not able to select exactly which properties are coming back if you're using managed metadata columns. So if I have 3 different properties I've created with a managed metadata column, I can't just tell SharePoint only show this one. I have to show all of them, or I have to show none of them. So do keep that in mind if you are using the managed metadata column. So let's do this. I've set up a property for disorders. So I want disorders to be something that I can bring back as a search refinement column. The other thing I want to do is I want to add numbers to these refiners. That's something you see in SharePoint 2013. It's something you see on Ontoloca. It's also something that you see in Fast Search for SharePoint. Now, Fast is going to be able to analyze a whole lot more results than you can do in standard SharePoint. Standard SharePoint has a little bit of an issue looking at duplicates, so sometimes these numbers are not going to be perfectly accurate, but they might give you a good idea of relative quantities of content that would come back for each value. So to do this, we're going to have to get into XML. If you're not familiar with XML, this is going to be really lightweight stuff, so good chance to kind of play around with this in practice. So to edit the refiner, I'm going to go to Site Actions and edit the page. Just like I removed that web part earlier, I'm going to go down to my refinement panel web part and select Edit the web part. Every one of the web parts that you edit in this way is going to give you a whole configuration window like you're able to see up in the top right. And so I go through a lot more of this configuration deeper within the video series, but one of the areas you're going to become familiar with is this filter category definition, XML. So let's grab this and click the builder, and this really scary text window comes out that is really difficult to work with. So to make my life easier, I'm going to select all of this and copy it, and I can throw that into Notepad, Word, or to make it really easy, I'm going to bring it into Visual Studio. So I need to create a new file. I have some backup stuff here just in case we were to type something in wrong. Known to misspell a few things. And I'm just going to cut in and paste this big chunk of XML. It is way, way prettier at this point. I can actually make a little bit more sense of what's going on in this XML. I'm going to cut over to a PowerPoint for just a second, so instead of scrolling down this and trying to explain everything that's going on, PowerPoint might help out just a bit. So are you able to see my screen still?
Still the virtual machine.
Robert? Let me show.
Yeah, I was on mute there.
There we go. How about now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so if we were to look at that XML, really all it is reoccurring instances of this line of code right here. Just graphicless configuration. If you ask Microsoft, they don't like to call XML code. But if I was to look at my result type refiner, this is what I'd see. I'd just see a title, the title that's going to display back to my users, how SharePoint is going to query the data, how many results are going to show for each category. And so you can use some logic as we go down this to see what's actually happening. The few parts of this that are really essential if you want to add a new custom refiner would be the title. You obviously don't want to call disorders result type. So we change the title to disorders. We'd go down to the mapped property, that fourth one from the bottom, and instead of calling it file extensions, I need to go grab the mapped property that we have for disorders. I think I just called it disorders when we were mapping, and Robert showed you earlier how to map a property. And the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to expose numbered refiners. We're going to expose counts. That last line of XML in the XML that you see there that says show counts equals count, that is not already in your XML. It's something that's built into SharePoint, just not exposed. So you will want to add that in so we can add numbers. So with that, I will jump out of this PowerPoint and go back to here. And you can see my screen again now?
Yep, looks good.
Yes.
Robert, okay. Okay. So now we saw that all that really confusing XML is actually this really long line right here. All the exact same properties are all coming back there. I am not a real big fan of retyping all of this, and I find no reason that you really need to do so. So if we're going to add a new refinement category, let's make our life simple and just copy one of these. So we're just going to copy this author. I'm going to grab it all the way from the beginning all the way to the closing tags there. And copy that guy back in. And instead of having to rewrite all that, all I have to do at this point is add the word disorders, and this is going to be what displays to my users. This could really be anything. If you have some weird property names, like Robert created that C type, you'd probably want to call it content type if you were to map something. Or display it to your users. The mapping can be crazy. And I'm going to go all the way to the end here and get my mapped property. And I believe that's disorder. But let's double check. Before you do anything here, you always want to kind of double check your property mapping. Problem is if you upload one, it's the wrong mapping, it's going to break the web part, and then you got to re-add the web part. Here we go. Sorry. And let's go down. Yeah, so you have this property, disorders, and that's mapped to that OWS disorders. So again, we know that's coming from SharePoint. And pull up Visual Studios, so we want to make sure that that's plural. The other thing that we're going to do, we talked about we might want to add counts onto this, so instead of rewriting that, I'm just going to grab show counts equals count from one of my other strings of XML. And copy that in. So what have I done at this point? I've copied one of the filter category definitions, changed the title so it displays a different title to my users. I've changed the property that filter category definition is looking at, and I've added counts for that property. Now, because I've only added counts in this one line, it's only going to show up for our disorders category. It's not going to show up for all our various different other properties. If I wanted to do that, all that I'd have to do is cut and paste that. Copy it, make sure I go before the closing tag, and paste that back in. So now I'll show it for two different properties. And finally, I guess probably I should have mentioned before this, you might want to have a backup of your XML before you go and replace it. Always good to have a backup there. Might have to save you a little trouble replacing the web part later on. I'm going to select all this, copy it, and paste it back into our text editor. Now, two other administrative tasks before we apply this. First off, SharePoint is only looking at, by default, at the first 50 results. So if you have a big result set, and let's say you were doing a search for file type and you wanted your numbers back, SharePoint's only going to look at the first 50 results. So if all your PDFs are after result number 50, you're not necessarily going to get a file type refiner for PDFs. So I'm just going to up that to 500. This is the hard limit in SharePoint. I could put 5,000 in there and it still wouldn't analyze more than 500 results for refiners. Keep in mind, as you increase that number, it will put more strain on your environment. So your search, every time you do a search, it's going to look at now 500 results and process those instead of just the first 50. So keep that in mind. Usually not a problem, even boosting that to 500. Fast, if you have fast search for SharePoint, can actually do the entire result set. So one of those benefits of fast. I also need to uncheck this, because if I'm using the default configuration, any of those customizations I just made are not going to apply. So I'll apply those. And we just went through a whole lot. Fortunately, this is all recorded. I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail even in the video series. So we've applied that change, and I'm just going to check it in and cross our fingers that I typed everything out right, and we'll be done. So we'll see now that I have numbers for both author and for disorders, because I only added that show counts equals count to those two. And I've now shown that I have a disorders refiner. I can double check that that's going to work. And I can clear those back out.
Josh, I have a couple questions.
Yeah, blasted through a lot of information there, so I figured they're probably piling up.
Is it possible to create a custom search form to search in a specific document library and search inside specific properties from columns?
Yeah, you could build something like that. You'd probably do it with a scope. So in the search service application, I can define the scopes. Here on this SharePoint environment, I have all sorts of scopes built out for all these different vertical demos that I'm working with. And so if we take this one, for example, Engineering HR, something I was working with, this scope would say only search for content within my engineering site. And oh, by the way, I also need to be in this this human resources audience to be able to see that content. So you can get really granular with how that works. The audience part here is a little tricky. You can really only do that if you have single audiences. If you have like content that has multiple audiences, this would throw you issues if you didn't have something like a third-party tool like Ontolica Fusion. But yeah, you could do that. And so you just you'd either create a search center that has that scope applied, or I could expose the scopes drop down right here and choose to only search against different content. I could make a tab right here. So let's say I had my SharePoint farm in the US and SharePoint farm in Europe. I could have one tab that searches the US and one tab that searches against Europe. So lots of different options there.
The other question is about, I guess it's a federation kind of question. The question is there a way to integrate search from two different content databases, one running WSS3 and one on SharePoint 2010?
There's the way that you would do that would be in Central Admin. You just set up a content source. So on this site, I'm crawling not only SharePoint, but I'm crawling the Surfray website and a couple different file shares and bringing back content that way. So I can take the SharePoint Search crawler and point it at an external content source. In that case, say I'm working primarily on SharePoint 2010, I'd point SharePoint 2010 search index at WSS, and I'd crawl the content that way. Now, if you want to leave the content separate, then you get into a little bit bigger challenge. Let's say, for example, I wanted to search YouTube straight from SharePoint. In that case, what you'd really want to do is something like a federated search web part. And what that would allow you to do is you set that web part off up to send the query out to YouTube. YouTube does all the work and then sends the results back to you. The challenge with that is those results will not be merged into your standard result set. So you're not going to have one result set. You're going to have a set here, and then you'll have another set out to the right or somewhere else formatted on the page with that second set of results. And the reason for that is SharePoint doesn't understand the relevancy. So it doesn't know how to look at two different content sources that are not mixed together and say, okay, why is this video more important on YouTube than the video that I have in SharePoint? So there's some challenges with that.
I think that's a really good point. In any case, if you have the opportunity, try to index the content and get it into the same index, because you're going to have everything in one view and it's going to be ranked together. So if you do a search for disorders, the documents that have the best match are going to come up at the top, regardless of what content database they came from. And of course, then you can also delineate them if you want later by building scopes that says, okay, then we only want to search, get the results back, in this case, from this content source. You can build out federated things like what Josh is showing you here with the with YouTube, but in those cases, you just have two separate search boxes on the same page, and that kind of method is really good when you can't index. It's not reasonable to index the other thing with your own, the other source with your own search engine. So yeah, good answer.
So there we go.
Apparently this guy has disorders.
So that bring back YouTube results. Either again, at the end of that content that I was planning to show, but again, I can hop around and answer other questions.
Still, there are a couple of questions coming in.
Answered earlier.
But yeah, if you want to go forward, Josh, that's fine.
That was the end of what I was planning on showing. So what we've looked at is, okay, how do we, what sort of properties do we have in SharePoint? How do we map those properties? How do we add different file types for indexing? And then looking at the front end, how do we manipulate the search experience through adding custom categories to refiners, and how do we add numbers to refiners? And I guess now I showed you how to add a federated search web part to the page.
Yeah, that was a good one.
A lot of content really quick. I didn't lose anybody.
Okay. Well, in that case, if there's nothing else at this point specifically to show, let me do a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and take the control back, and I'll show folks where the DVD is in case anyone's interested. And then, of course, we'll continue with the questions in the remaining time that we have. So let me go ahead and take the control back first. All right. A bunch of good webinar windows open here, so let me go ahead and clear those out. You should be hopefully able to see the homepage of SharePointVideos.com.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So for folks who are interested in understanding more deeper into what Josh and Robert have shown so far, this is a DVD that they've authored. It's under individual SharePoint DVD packages. Within that, you'll see a bunch of other DVDs that we've had so far in workflows, fundamentals, BCS, reporting services, etc. And here we go. Here's the SharePoint 2010 search. And there is a lot of content that's on this DVD. A lot of content, a lot of good content. There's 3 videos which are also free to watch, no registration or anything necessary, so please go ahead and check those out at least and see what you think about it. And if you have any questions on the DVD, let us know as well. I'll start going through some of the questions here, and if you want to take the screen back, Rob or Josh, let me know if you want to show something specific. So there's a question here. Let's see. Is it possible to create mapped properties to data coming in from external lists?
Yes.
Good question for you, Robert.
Yeah, absolutely. The requirement is that the crawler can see that information. So if it's a list from another SharePoint site, it's no problem, because the crawler should just go into the other SharePoint system and grab the properties from there. You just have to go in and make sure that you've got unique names and that those properties are crawled in the search service application. If it's coming from something like a file share or a third-party system, there can be different levels of what kind of property mappings you can get. So for example, file shares, you can get the file share, the name of the file, any properties that are embedded in the document are usually extracted, especially if it's PDF or Word documents. It'll pull out things like author tags and title tags out of those documents. Also the date, last modified date of the document, that'll come back too. Now if it's another document management system and you're crawling it like a web page, there may be some limits to the content you can get. If you have a connector, a custom connector for that other system, then you can build in yourself what you want to be pulled back and how that should be delivered. But if you're just crawling those items like a web page, there can be some limits to the associations that you can make between custom columns and items. But if it's SharePoint, it should be supported out of the box.
Great, thank you, Rob. Another one here. The question here is, a while back in 2010 search, the sites area was a refiner that you would drill into each collection and subsites to help narrow the results. Mine is gone, it says. Did that disappear in a hotfix service pack?
I'm not aware of anything being removed. Some things do change as you go along. I do see some properties not available as people work with their SharePoint, and it could be because the permissions have changed on the property database in SQL. So do go ahead and check that and make sure your search service application's default content access account has full access to the property database. It should be called, in SQL, should be called search service application property database. And check that, because if it can't query those values, then it won't be able to bring them back. Another thing is check alternative access mappings. That's something I maybe should have talked about, but it's something I see a big problem with in SharePoint solutions all the time. If you have your server name, or you've set up the host name of the site, or using host headers for search, and then you're accessing the site through some other URL and you haven't properly set up the alternative access mappings, a lot of SharePoint will work fine, but search will not. So do check alternative access mappings as well to make sure that the values that you have, that the search engine sees, and the values that are coming, that the users are hitting, are mapped there, because the crawler will also have issues resolving URLs and storing those in the property database if it doesn't know what to look for.
Okay, great. Another thing that I'm sure in many people's minds, what is the difference that you guys see between, the main differences between SharePoint 2010 search and SharePoint 2013 search?
That's a big question.
It's a big question. A lot of people know that there was previously 2 products that Microsoft had, FAST and SharePoint Search, and there's some discussion of what happened with FAST. And really what happened is the best parts of FAST were taken out and put into SharePoint Search. In 2010, FAST was used as the back-end crawler, And, well, actually, that's not true. SharePoint did the crawling, and FAST held the index, and then a lot of mechanisms was going back and forth between SharePoint and FAST, and basically they've amalgamated those two. So now SharePoint supports a lot of the things that FAST will do, like some out-of-the-box entity extraction, but it also has things like query rules and result sources. So you can do a lot of much richer things with 2013. Also, I'm going to give a webinar just in a few minutes about search-based applications, and that's one thing that's much stronger in 2013 is that you can actually build search-based applications just using out-of-the-box web parts in 2013. So other things, like I mentioned before, now there's a new indexing component with 2013. And there's some preview functionality, although you need the Office Web App Server farm to do that. But yeah, there's a lot of new stuff in Search. I think probably Search is one of the biggest parts of SharePoint 2013 that's different now. So a lot of great additions to it. And with that, I just have to say, Asif, thank you for today. I'm going to jump off now so I can jump into the other one. But Josh will stay on and answer any further questions. And thank everyone for attending.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rob. Josh, did you want to add to what Rob was saying about 2013 differences?
Oh, yeah, because it's kind of out of context of the video series, it might be worthwhile sharing the slide deck that we've put together actually on it, because I've been working with 2013 for probably a year at this point, and so we've put together a heck of a lot of detail on that. And see if I've shared a slide deck with you from SlideShare. If anybody is interested to flip through that, it might answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put that link actually in the chat area so everybody sees it. So I'll do that in just a minute. Okay.
Were there other questions that have come through the chat?
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that first, actually. So let me look at the questions first here. Another one, Oscar is asking, what is the crawl property to use to expose create date through a managed property?
So you want to be able to, maybe I don't understand, you want to be able to crawl a property for creation date and create a property that you can use then, say as a search refiner or a searchable property or things like that. I'm not able to see the responses, so see if you might want to double check if I've kind of got that on point.
Right, I'm not 100% sure about that one either. I'm sure he'll come back and
refine it further. If you want to give me control, sure. I'll share my screen again. All right, so it's really along the lines of what Robert was mentioning earlier, that there's certain things like content type or I believe the upload date is locked by default, and so you just need to create properties based off of that. Let's look at the front end to figure out what property you really want to work with. I love that it doesn't have the navigation in here by default. So you're not actually interested in a modified date. You're looking for the date that the document was uploaded. So created is the property. Let's see if SharePoint's got a created. Yeah, so you'd probably just need to work with this created date. I won't be able to show you here because the time it would take to crawl wouldn't work out. But you should just be able to create a new property and map it to this created date. That'll do the trick. There might be one of those already, so you might need to give it a different name. I said created by, but you might need to abbreviate it or something. hopefully that answered the question.
Okay. Here's another one over here. Let's see. Okay, so this one actually I can answer myself also. Does DVD package covers custom search development using Visual Studio? It is not really for that kind of development. You know, I personally look at development. There's two different kind of development, and specifically SharePoint area. There's the code hardcore development. There's the no-code development, and our focus has been and continues to be on the no-code development arena. There is a whole lot of stuff you could do without using any code, and that's what the authors Rob and Josh have offered in the video DVD package. There's a whole lot of customizations you could do. Now, if you talk about XML as code development or XML some changes like Josh showed and he also shows in DVD, then yes, there's some that kind of code development, but nothing using managed code or Visual Studio. Let's see, another one.
Yeah, I really just use Visual Studio in the video series as a way to see the content, see the XML a little bit easier instead of having to look at a notepad.
Okay, great. Regarding this webinar, someone's asking about the webinar. Yes, we will make it available. So it's going to be available either later today or by tomorrow, hopefully, on the site, along with other webinars that you see. Okay, 1 second here. Okay, in the search service application, will we be able to see all the custom properties created in the document libraries, lists, and any of the sites in SharePoint? Does that make sense?
Yes, where you want to go to look at that, if I click on Metadata Properties here, the first place it's taking me is to my Managed Properties. But you'll notice up top that I can also select to go to Crawled Properties. After SharePoint's done a crawl, it will pick up those properties, and we notice I'll have a heck of a lot more properties in crawled properties than in managed properties. So these are the properties that SharePoint is reading, which should be just about anything that you have in SharePoint, and some stuff that might be in Active Directory and security and databases. You then have to choose. These are the properties you then use to create these managed properties. The reason they're not all put in as managed properties to begin with is because if I'm trying to run my full crawl and I'm running off of 704 properties instead of only looking at 155, you can imagine it takes quite a bit longer to process all of that. I'm sure there's other reasons too, but that's the biggest reason that I can justify for it.
Okay, sounds good. By the way,
it's actually been that same way in 2007 and 2013 as well. So, no.
Oh wow, good to know. By the way, Scott here, and one of the audience members, thanking you and Robert for all the books you've authored. So that's great.
Not a problem. Yeah, the best thing about those is you figure out everything you really can and can't do with SharePoint while you're writing it, instead of just reading a blog post that doesn't really give code that works. You can't imagine how many times I've run across a post for how to show percentages instead of counts. It doesn't work, and somebody wrote that post, and everybody keeps sharing it around, and nobody's ever really tested it.
Ooh,
so
that's not good.
Yeah, so
wow.
So hopefully you guys find that in the video series we're showing you how to do things you can actually recreate, and not just hypotheticals.
Good to know. All right, here's another one. This is Scott again. How can you utilize synonyms in MMS to provide the same results for the original term and the synonym?
Oh, sorry, say that one more time.
Sure. How can you utilize synonyms?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Josh, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how can you utilize synonyms in MMS to provide the same result for the original term and the synonym?
Same result for the original term and the synonym. Ooh, manage metadata service. Now we get into some really fun stuff. I touch on some high-level things on the manage metadata service. Don't drive into just huge amounts of detail in the series. wish I had that question written down. I'm trying to think about it.
Yeah, I just sent it to you also in the chat message.
Well, you need to if you can chat that to me so I can read it one more time. How can you utilize synonyms to provide the same result in the original term and the synonyms? I don't know what the challenge would be there. It should be working by default when you create a synonym, unless your term in the managed metadata service is using a different term than your synonym. Oh, okay. Synonyms on the managed metadata service terms do not show up in the search results. Gotcha. That's a little bit clearer. Have you created managed metadata columns? Because I assume what you probably need to do is once you create those terms in the managed metadata service, you then need to be able to apply those actually to the data through a column, like this document type column that we've created right here. This is all pulling from the managed metadata service, and then you need to index that column or set that up as a managed property. The problem with this might give you a better answer. The problem with managed metadata columns is they're all filtering back into one GUID. They all filter back into one property. And that's actually the reason we have those issues selecting which properties to show up in the refinement panel in the search UI. So all the managed metadata properties, I think that's OWS underscore managed metadata properties. I'd have to find the exact property, but every single thing that you tag coming from the term store all comes back to one single property, and there's no way to really delimitate between those unless you have third-party tools to help with that. Concept classifier might help with that. It's something that we can do if you're talking, just the search interface. It's something we can do with Ontoloca Search, but it definitely takes some third-party development or some deep development if you have hands-on skills to be able to do it.
Okay.
I know that might be a little bit vague. Feel free if you want me to actually take a look, because it'd be hard to answer specific to that environment unless I saw the content. I'm more than happy to take a look at it after the webcast.
And there's another question I sent you through the chat.
Yeah, in the search service application, we'll be able to see all the custom properties created in doc libraries and lists in any of the sites in SharePoint. Yeah, and I think I might have answered that earlier, but that's what's coming back in these crawled properties. These are all the different properties that are coming back in lists and libraries in SharePoint. They just don't all have mappings, as you can see here.
Wonderful. Okay, so I think as far as the main questions are concerned, they're done. Folks, I am seeing a couple of questions out there which are really specific to your environment. If something has happened that's not working correctly, really we're not able to address specific scenarios like that within a general webinar like that. If you do want to reach out afterwards to us through our email address, which for me, by the way, is I'll send it to you actually through chat also, asif@sharepointelearning.com. I can go ahead and disseminate it to Josh or to Rob if there is anything specific. And if you're interested, we also offer consulting as well if you want us to look into a specific scenario and guide you with something. So, Josh, is there anything specific that you wanted to talk about at the end before we wrap up?
No, just the personal plug for us. If there are some things that you're trying to achieve in SharePoint, such as how do we do some synchronization of metadata between file shares, or how do we add document previews to libraries or search, or how do we build certain things out that seem a bit more beyond out-of-the-box customizations or XML, please check us out at surfray.com. More than happy to help out in any of those scenarios. And worst case scenario, bounce around some ideas and let you know, can SharePoint actually do what you're looking to achieve? questions. So this is our website here. And, you can get in touch with Robert and I. Take a look. We have a whole team that all we do at Surfray is specialize in building out SharePoint Search.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate your time, and of course appreciate Robert's time as well. I know he had to jump off a little bit earlier, but we'll talk to him again. So that's it, folks, for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Like I said before, we have recorded this, and it will be available on our site pretty soon. So if you go to the site, you go to Videos tab, you'll see within Free Videos there's a webinar section, and within that you're going to find all the earlier webinar recordings, plus this webinar recording is going to be there later today or tomorrow. All right, with that, once again, thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time and your knowledge that you've shared. And thank you, everybody else, for being here and spending your time with us, and hopefully it was productive. All right. Take care, everyone. Hope to see you next time.